Well, thanks for that, North Shore. It's just a joy, as always, to be here. Welcome to those of you in this room. If you're joining us online, we're so glad you're here. Truly, I have been incredibly encouraged by the work that God is doing in this church community. Even in just the last several months, I've been following along with your mental health and faith series that y'all were in, just some honest and courageous work there. And now we're all a few weeks into this series based on those words that really are the heartbeat, the kind of center conviction of North Shore, which are this: Jesus can change everything for anyone. Jesus can change everything for anyone. It is a seriously bold claim when you think about it. And the single most important question that's kind of at the center of this series, and I would say the single most important question each of us has to answer with our life is that true? And not just true in a sense that I believe it, but true in a sense that how I live honestly reflects that belief. My family and I had a interesting and maybe unfortunate thing happen a couple years back. We woke up one morning to find that not one, but two of our cars had been stolen from in front of our home in the middle of the night. Someone may have left the keys in the car unlocked, but it's still stealing. So we have this little camera. They just kind of drove one away and came back and drove the other one away. Wrong, but anyway, so our cars were gone. We saw that this had happened. My husband and I, we called the police. The police came. They were super helpful, took our statement. They left, and a couple hours later, they called us back and they said, hey, we think we found one of your vehicles. Do you think you could come to the site of this accident and identify it? We said, no, we can't go anywhere. We don't have any cars. Thankfully, we got there. I honestly don't remember how, but we got there, and sure enough, someone had taken my car and driven it off a kind of an embankment, really sort of a cliff. And they totaled the car completely, fled the scene, so there was nobody there, but it was a bad accident. There was blood and things around, and the officer at the scene said to us, why don't you guys look around in the car and see if there's anything that you want to keep before we have it towed, to the yard or whatever. We said, great. So we get in the car, and in the front seat, there's a backpack, a black backpack that didn't belong to any of us, presumably left behind by the person who'd done this. So of course I grab the backpack and I start going through it. And I've got my Nancy Drew hat on. I'm like, I'm living my 12-year-old dream. My husband's like, what are you doing? I'm like, we are gonna catch this person. So I'm looking through the backpack, there's a notebook. And I'm like, oh, this is gold, right? I open it up. Most of the pages were blank except for one. And on that one page, at the very top, in kind of bold black letters, it said, things I want to change, with a colon after it. And then there were three things listed, and I'll never forget this. And each item had a checkbox next to it, like a checklist almost. And the first thing said this: get clean. The second thing said, develop a relationship with my nephew, and then in parentheses, or with Max, and then in parentheses it said, nephew. And then the third thing on the list said, be at a good enough place to attend his third birthday party. And then in another kind of parenthetical remark, it said, build him a train set. And I sat there for a moment, just kind of overwhelmed with sadness for whoever had written these words, because each of those boxes was unchecked. And I was moved by that experience for a lot of reasons, but one thing that really stuck with me is this truth that if we're all honest with ourselves, whether you're a car thief or a coder or a pastor, whatever it is, whoever it is you are, we all have things that we long to change in our habits, our attitudes, our character. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about change motivated by a toxic sort of legalism. I'm not talking about change motivated by perfectionism or shame. I'm talking about a deep sense we have that we were created to be people who flourish and who contribute to the flourishing of others. The theologian C.S. Lewis called this sense a universal moral conscience. And he said, it's consistent in all people across time and culture. And he said, such a thing can only be explained by the existence of a creator God. In other words, we have this innate sense that no matter who we are, the formation of things like love and courage, connection and joy, generosity, peacefulness, truth, those things belong in our story. And like the master auto theft guy, we all probably could make a list. Maybe even as I'm kind of speaking, there's things coming to mind right now. Different things that we would put beside our check boxes, places we long to grow. Because there's something in us that whispers, you're created for this life. You're created to flourish. In his second letter to the Corinthians, one of the first church leaders named Paul reminds a community that such a life of flourishing is possible. And these are the very words we heard Ashley read for us this morning. He says, so if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. See, everything has become new. In other words, when we entrust our lives to God's care, it's not a decision that merely changes where I spend eternity, though it does that, praise God, but it's also the start of a profound transformation within me, with who I'm becoming. Later, the same guy, Paul, encouraged a fellow follower of Jesus by saying, take hold of the eternal life to which you were called. Again, he's emphasizing, he's inviting his friend, this believer, to experience something new right now. And you can almost hear the urgency in his voice. It's as if he's saying, there's more, there's so much more. There's newness to be had in your relationships. There's newness to be had in that area where you've just felt stuck in a bad habit. Don't settle for what is old. Everything has become new. Jesus has changed everything. Everything. One scholar says it this way, eternity is a present possession and we are called to take hold of it. And so my hope for us today is to consider, what does it mean to take hold of that kind of life? Jesus is the one who changes us, but what is our role in that process? How do we sort of orient our lives towards that end? And as we explore that question, we're gonna pick up right where y'all left off last week in the Gospel of Mark. Mark is one of the books of the Bible that gives us an account of Jesus' life. Last week, Scotty taught on Mark chapter 4, which is a story about Jesus and his disciples and kind of this once-in-a-generation storm. Today, we're gonna move ahead just 2 chapters in the book of Mark, which coincidentally brings us to another similar but different story about Jesus, his disciples, and a boat. Here's what Mark tells us. Immediately, he made his disciples get into a boat and go on ahead to the other side to Bethsaida. Well, he dismissed the crowd. After saying farewell to them, he went up on the mountain to pray. That's Jesus. When evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on land. When he saw that they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came towards them early in the morning, walking on the sea. He intended to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So here we are again, Jesus, his disciples, and a boat. But you'll notice this particular story is different from last week's story in a few key ways. For starters, the disciples, Jesus' closest friends and followers, are in the boat and they're headed where Jesus has sent them, where he's told them to go. But this time, at least initially, Jesus is not in the boat with them. He's back on land. And notice instead of the weather being a huge storm, kind of a once-in-a-generation type thing, Mark says this time the disciples have merely countered an adverse wind. It's not so much a storm as it seems to just be a persistent sort of nuisance keeping them from where they want to go. And Mark says they're straining against this wind. It's interesting, this image of wind is one we see all throughout the Bible. In fact, if you start at the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1, when you come to just the second verse, you read that God's spirit, or literally God's wind, the word there is ruach in Hebrew, was hovering over the chaotic waters. And then move ahead to Genesis chapter 3. Now Adam and Eve eat the fruit that they were commanded not to eat, and the serpent deceives them saying, you can live a better life without God. Do this on your own. You'll be better for it. And they buy the lie and they eat the fruit, and immediately after that moment, shame and fear enter the story, and so they hide. And when we get to this point, we read that God is walking through the garden looking for them, and scripture tells us it's during that day's cool evening breeze. It's a funny little detail, but it's interesting. At creation, there's this holy wind of God's ruach spirit. And when Adam and Eve trust the serpent over and above God, there's this new sort of cooler adversarial wind blowing the other way. The disciples on the boat have encountered this wind. And most of us, if we've ever worked to change things in the direction God calls us to change, have encountered this same wind. It's not a storm, but it's persistent. And we keep straining against it with all we've got, but time can pass, years can pass. We feel stuck in the same old habits, the same old ways, the same old relational dynamics. See, the disciples are up against that same old lie, that same old wind which originated in the garden with the serpent that says, you're better off on your own. It's all up to you. Just keep trying harder. Just hang in there. Do it yourself. I picture the disciples out on the water sort of bickering and fighting and blaming each other. Now, the text doesn't say that's what happens, but this is the case when we live lives of constant straining, even towards good things, even when we're trying to get where God's called us to go. If we attempt it on our own, the relationships around us begin to erode. We feel it. We have no margin. We're worn out. We're overwhelmed. It's interesting to note that over half of Jesus' 12 disciples were fishermen. So quite literally, this picture of them straining is one that they were familiar with. Another day, same old story, same old wind. And while it's difficult and exhausting, at least we know what to expect. See, there's something here for us to chew on, this truth that though the adversarial wind is hard, we're often at home in it. It's what our culture prizes. It gives us a sense that we know where this whole thing is headed. We have control of our own destiny. Even when self-reported anxiety and depression is at an all-time high in our country. Even when our kids are living under astronomical pressure to be successful. Even when straining so often leads to addiction or unhealthy forms of self-medicating. Even when straining appears to be sinking. It's habitually where we go. So what's the alternative? Where do we start in this journey towards the change that God has called us towards, if it's not straining? There's a great story I recently heard that kind of gets at that question for us. About 100 years ago, there was a man named Roland Hazard. What a name. And he secretly struggled with alcoholism. He had a severe addiction to alcohol. And he was jailed several times, but he had plenty of money, so he was able to cover it up. But he knew something in his life needed to change, and he was desperate for change. So he took a year and he traveled to Europe to receive care from a psychiatrist named Carl Jung. And he left Jung sober. He left Jung convinced that he was now so self-aware that he had overcome his addiction. But after a year of straining, he got drunk before he even reached the boat to get back home. So he went back to Jung, who said to him, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never seen one single case as bad as yours." And Roland said on hearing this, it was like, the gates of hell clung shut on him. Then he asked, "Is there no exception?" And Jung responded to him, he said, "Yes, I have seen once in a while people with a case as bad as you recover. But here's what has to happen. They have to have something called a vital spiritual experience. They find God, and if hope is to be found for you, that's where it will be found." In other words, there is some change, the most important change, that only God can work, that only God can do. And thankfully, Roland found God and had a spiritual experience in a little group of Jesus followers called the Oxford Group. They would eventually become known as Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, it's worth noting that the first of the steps of this little community, it's not to make a checklist for change and then commit to it and throw all our efforts at it. The first step towards change is actually to surrender, to hand that checklist over. To say, God, there are things I long to change and I cannot do it. I'm straining against the wind, it isn't working. See, the irony is that surrender, admitting I can't do it on my own, it's not just giving up and saying I'm done and, kind of going back to the old way of doing things, but it's actually opening up a space in my life and handing that space over to someone else. I'm giving over my power. I'm giving over my will. So surrendering to the right person, the right being is absolutely essential. We are giving the source of surrender power over us, power to fill that space, power over our self-understanding and our actions. I'm actually quite fascinated by this concept of power, which is why some nights after 8 p.m. you can find me watching Netflix documentaries about kind of these cults that develop and then sort of implode for various reasons. But I find them fascinating because in a cult, people show up and they surrender everything, their secrets, their money, their choices. And that cult leader, that guru, has power to exert influence over folks however they choose. And we've all seen or heard enough of these stories to know that such acts of surrender do not lead to flourishing. Now, why do I say that? I say that because it's really important. Surrender is a serious and vulnerable thing to do, and we should not do it lightly. The object of our surrender, the one to whom we are surrendering, it makes all the difference. That brings us back to the story of the disciples in the boat. Jesus is on the shore, and the text tells us this, one of the sweetest verses in all of Scripture. He sees them from a long way off. Friends, if you hear nothing else this morning, hear this in your struggle, in your strain, from a long way off, Jesus sees you. He sees you. And he responds by moving toward them. Mark tells us he made his way during the fourth watch of the night. In the Roman world, the night was divided into 4 sections. The fourth watch was the scariest. There's all these kind of legends and ghost stories that sort of existed around the things that happened during the fourth watch. It was the low point of the night. This is when Jesus comes. And when Jesus gets to them on the water, Mark tells us something that at first glance is a bit confusing. It says this, he intended to pass them by. It's a puzzling statement. Why would Jesus go to his straining disciples only to pass them by? Again, it's helpful to look at the whole of the Bible for some context around why Mark uses this particular language. In the book of Exodus, a man named Moses has been called to free the Israelites from slavery and lead them towards a new story. And Moses is partway through that calling and he's realizing it's hard. Moses is scared. People are hard to lead, and everyone seems sort of entrenched in the old way of doing things. He's facing this adversarial wind, and so he pleads with God to show up, and God does. In Exodus chapter 33, it says, God says, as my glorious presence passes by. Now we come to 1 Kings, another book in the Old Testament. Elijah has the torch of continuing to lead God's people towards a new story. And he is similarly afraid. He is similarly overwhelmed and alone and ready to quit. And God calls him in that moment saying, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. The Lord is passing by. See, when God passes by Moses and when God passes by Elijah, he was offering them reassurance of his presence. And so when Jesus intends to pass by his disciples stuck in the boat, this is Mark's way of saying to us that God's divine and saving presence is at work here. Again, we see a nod to the Exodus story when Jesus stands there on the water and he says to the disciples as he walks towards their boat, it is I. Another literal translation would simply be, I am. This is an intentional parallel to the Old Testament. The name Jesus speaks on the water is the name the Creator, God of the universe, gave when Moses asked God, who are you? And so Jesus stands on the water. He is revealing something hugely important about his identity. He's not just a miracle worker or a doer of magic tricks. He's not just a revolution leader more powerful than Rome. He's not just a healer. He is, in fact, the I am. He is the creator God. He is the Ruach, Spirit of God. He is the wind that blows the right way. Stay with me now, because this is so important. All of Jesus' disciples were Jewish, different kinds of Jewish, but they would have known these stories of Moses and Elijah and the heroes of the faith. But then Jesus does something different. In the Old Testament, when God appears and passes by, that's it. You just kind of get a glimpse of him for a time, and then he disappears. But in this moment, as Mark tells the story, the God of the universe, the I am, doesn't merely pass by to offer assurance. He doesn't just return to the shore to kind of cheer them on from a distance. He actually climbs in the boat with them. That dark and weary and tired boat. It's as though he is inviting the disciples to take the old stories about the utter power and the goodness and the love of the Creator, the I am, who freed the slaves, who parted the seas. And he effectively says, don't you see? It's the same God. It's me right here, right now, with you. And this image, it's core to how Jesus changes us more to be like him. I surrender. I come to a point where straining to be the person I know I was created to be, it doesn't work. And in surrendering, I free this space in my life, and it feels risky and uncomfortable because I'm turning over my needs, my choices, all of them, how I spend my money, how I raise my kids, all of it. I'm turning that ability over to someone else. That's what it means that Jesus is Lord. But as we make a practice and a habit of surrendering to Jesus, we find that he is worthy of that. We find that he is the only one to whom we can entrust our life and our choices and our will. And as I do that in all the various sort of challenges and roles and contexts and callings of my life, I begin to see now there is space for something to replace that straining. This is why Jesus would teach the same disciples in the boat with him to pray that prayer, not my will, not my will. Friends, those are hard words to pray. Not my will, but your will, not the old way, but the new way. Fill this space. I'm surrendering to you. And he does that not just by instructing us on how to do that, not just by showing us, but by actually giving us more of himself. My will, my power, my spirit, my love, my life, I'm giving it to you. I'm filling you. I'm not just passing by. See, this Jesus is one with the Creator God. He's that wind from Genesis chapter 1. He blows us towards flourishing, towards wholeness. He's the only one we surrender to. We're doing a brave thing this year. I think it's brave. We're teaching our 5-year-old son, his name's Mark. We're teaching him how to ski. Sort of. We're trying. Mixed results. But the first time we did this, the first day we went out with him, I say we, it was me. My husband snowboards, which is convenient for him. So I just put him in his boots and his skis, and then I put him between my skis. And we just went down the hill and did it again and again. We were all having a blast. And then I said, okay, time has come, right? We went up the little magic carpet, which if you're not a skier, it's just this very little mild hill. And I sent him on his way. I said, it's your turn. And he did okay for the first bit of the run. And then he got to the bottom and I could see his little body started to shake and he just crashed hard. And he was laying there just looking up at the sky. He's a little dramatic. I love him. I don't know where he gets it. He's just laying there looking up at the sky. And I ski down to him. And the first words out of his mouth, he said, Mom, it's no use. And I said, what do you mean it's no use? You're doing great. I try to be the hype person, real positive. He said, Mom, I'm trying very hard, but I think it's just better if I keep skiing between your skis. And I said, Bubby, I know it's tricky, but this is part of how we learn. And then I looked at him, I said, you have everything you need to do this. We're gonna keep trying. You have everything you need to do this. And he's still lying there in the snow, looking up at the sky. He says, no, Mom, you have everything I need to do this. See, as we get at this question of how God changes us, there's something in that image of togetherness that's kind of clarifying. When I head down the mountain with Mark between my skis, my skill becomes his skill. My strength becomes his strength. My knowledge becomes his knowledge. He's able to do things that without me, he simply could not do. He's right. At this point, I have everything that he needs. See, Jesus exemplifies for us how it is we are called to live. Love God, love your neighbor, be generous, seek justice, don't get caught in the worries of this world. And the thing that sets Jesus apart from every other person who came claiming to be God is that he didn't just exemplify, and he didn't just teach, and he didn't just send the law or a set of rules to follow. He made this audacious claim that none before him or since him have made. He said, I am the way. What a statement. So if you want to change, to live a life of abundance and wholeness, don't just watch me, but we ski down this mountain together. My ability and power to do something becomes your ability and your power to do something. My life that I would give for you becomes your life. Surrender that old story that says change is on you. I have everything you need. Maybe you're listening to this message and you're thinking, that's all good and well, but that has not been my experience. I try, I want to follow Jesus. I want to take hold of this life he has for me, but I still feel stuck. There's things I just wish I could break free from. And hear me, if that's you, you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. It took Jesus' closest friends and followers a while to understand this part of who he was. It was so different than anything they'd ever seen before. In fact, if we could sum up the disciples in this story from Mark, we might say they strained, they did not recognize, they did not see who Jesus was. Their hearts were still hard. They were unchanged. The ones most committed to Jesus were having the hardest time figuring out the true source of change. And I have to tell you, I've been following Jesus since I was 4 years old, and the way of straining comes so naturally to me. It's interesting, at the very end of Mark chapter 6, we're told the boat finally comes ashore again. So they come to this community, and the people immediately recognize, the text says, they recognize Jesus and they run to him. And they bring their sick to him. And Mark tells us the sick are healed. They were changed. That means that unlike the disciples who didn't recognize Jesus, here's what the crowds do. They recognize, they run towards, they experience life change. What can we learn from that contrast? See, our job is not to work the change on our own. We do not have the power to do it. It'll only lead to exhaustion, defeat, anxiety, shame. Some of you might be living in that place right now. Our job is not to work the change ourselves, but to, like the crowds on the shore, to make a habit of seeing Jesus, of recognizing Jesus. And this isn't just something we do once, but we do it from moment to moment to moment. This is why that wise and great author of Proverbs said, in all your ways acknowledge him. In all your ways acknowledge him. And that picture of Jesus climbing in the boat with us, it's significant because it means that at every single juncture in our lives, Jesus is there waiting to be recognized. He's not just passing by, he's there. He's there when the pressure of our work feels beyond us. Acknowledge him. He's there when that moment of temptation to gossip about another person so I can feel better about myself happens. He's there, acknowledge him. He's there when all you want is another drink, acknowledge him. He's there when your marriage feels like, man, it's just hanging by a thread and you just want to say that thing that you know is really gonna hurt. Acknowledge him. I love how the late Dallas Willard articulates this very dynamic. He says, when I undertake all my activities, I am not doing them on my own. I am doing them in the confidence, vision, and expectation in the spirit and character of Christ. And then this part, you really get a sense that he's kind of a boring professor, but he says, if I am writing a paper or preparing for a conference or outlining a course, and you could fill in the blank, whatever it is you do in a day, I don't just do that looking to myself, I do that in expectation that God will act in me. So as we pursue change, we surrender, we receive into that place of surrender, into the boat, you could say, that I am God who has come for us. And that's the good news, but perhaps the best news in the story comes at the very end, and we'll end with this. The disciples are struggling to understand this new life Jesus is inviting them into. And Mark says, in addition to not recognizing, they did not understand about the loaves. Again, kind of a weird line, but in context, it makes sense because in the story immediately before this one, Jesus had fed a massive group of people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Everybody ate, everyone was full, and there was still more to go around. That happened right before they got on the boat. A while back, I was a part of this day-long pastor's retreat, and as part of that experience, we did something called communion. We received communion. If you're new to church and that language doesn't make sense to you, communion is something we'll do periodically. It kind of represents receiving into our story the love and the grace of Jesus who died on the cross for us. And so we're doing that, and I'll never forget it because instead of handing us like a little cracker or a little piece of bread, which is kind of typical when you receive communion, they handed us a full loaf. Like I'm talking packed with gluten, possibly homemade, like really delicious thing. And I was actually out of the room for a moment, so I didn't hear the instructions, and I came back into the room and someone just handed me this huge loaf of bread. I was like, great. So I'm kind of sitting there looking around like, what are we supposed to do with this? What are they doing? And finally there was one of the instructors was there, and I said, hey, what am I supposed to do with this? I whispered over to her, and she said, you're supposed to eat it. And I'm like, eat it, the whole thing. And I looked at her and I said, how much of it am I supposed to eat? And I'll never forget her response. She said, eat until you're full. Eat until you are full. Let me bring this together for us. The God of the universe comes to us in Jesus in the midst of our strains for something better, to help us see a new story, a new way. And to do that, all we have to do is surrender and keep recognizing him right there with us in the boat. That promise is that God's ability to give, to fill the space made empty by our surrender, it will never, ever run out. That's what we understand about the loaf. How much of it do we eat? We eat until we are full, filled with a grounded sense of belonging in Christ, filled with a vision of work and purpose that I can go about with peace because it's ultimately God's work, it's not my work. Filled with love and patience in relationships because the other person's action is not the source of my security, but Christ alone is. Filled with a vision of beauty of God's kingdom, of what the world could be, that takes my attitude of cynicism and changes it. See, friends, we are not changed because we try, but we are changed because we are filled. Like the miraculous feast on the hillside that day, with the loaves, there is an abundance, there is a generosity of this God like nothing we've ever known. His ability to fill us will not run out. That's what the cross represents. It's what the resurrection represents. There's nothing he wouldn't give on our behalf. This is why he can change everything for anyone, because what he gives is never in short supply. Wherever you are today, God has something to give you. So I'll close with this question. What's on your list of things to change? One big thing I feel God leading me to change in my own life this year is just kind of how I think about stuff, how I spend my money, how I kind of live more simply so I can practice generosity more freely. There's other stuff on that list, but I'll save that for another sermon. What's on your list? Maybe you take some time today and just sit and reflect. Where might God be inviting you to grow and to change towards your most Christ-like self? Again, it's not about legalism. It's not about shame or about trying to meet an impossible standard. There's no condemnation in Christ. None of us is perfect. It's not going to happen. This is about a God who loves you so very much, who longs for you to flourish, to take hold of eternity today, to be your best self, and then to go into all the world, into this community as a person of hope. That's what it's about. And so he tells us eternity is now. Grab hold of it, ironically, by letting go of that list that you write out. Hand it over, surrender, say to God, I can't, God, but you can. And I'm gonna let you try. Because you're the only one worthy. You're the only one who created this world. You're the only one who knows me inside out. You're the only one. Let's give it to that God. Would you pray with me? Loving Father, what a gift it is in the midst of the world we live in that can feel at times so chaotic and overwhelming and anxious, to know you, to see you, that you come near to us. You remind us, hey, there's a way. There's a way towards change. There's a way towards peace. There's a way towards hope. This isn't it. Come follow me. Come do this with me. God, I pray that you would meet each of us, that your Holy Spirit would meet us in this moment. Reveal to us maybe those areas where we know change needs to happen. Help us to look courageously and lovingly and honestly at those places in our story. And God, we surrender them to you. We know that you can. We know that you are a God whose very nature is to give. For God so loved that he gave, to give and to fill us where we feel like we're lacking. God, restore us with your love, with a sense of belonging, purpose. Fill us to the brim, God, that we might flourish, that we might be a part of your plan to love this world. The North Shore Church would be a part of that plan to love this world. We pray these things in Jesus' holy name.